Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Roadshow edition, coming to you today from New York City. So many things continue to happen. I just don't want to leave you without any information, especially on some of the things we've been covering for a long time, and there have been developments. Overnight, there were attacks at two oil refineries in Europe. Two separate countries got hit, and you, of course, know we're talking about Russia and Ukraine. Well, as it turns out, yeah, those were both hit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this one has expanded beyond. And there were two strikes in Hungary and Romania. And the Hungarian press is very concerned that this has all the hallmarks of a suspicious sabotage hit. This is the Hungarian conservative you're seeing here. Explosion of refineries in Hungary, Romania sparked sabotage suspicions. And then when you dig down into the details and you find out that these facilities were hit, were two of the ones in both countries that take on Russian oil. And that's been a big bone of contention between the European Union and especially both Europe, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. They have been at the forefront of not being willing to just cut off all their energies. And now all of a sudden, the physical lines have been hit. Of course, this kind of harkens back to what happened at the Nord Stream pipeline earlier in the war, and how that had a lot of people concerned that there were sabotage going on. Originally it was blamed on Russia, of course, and I think I've already seen some in the Western press that this is apparently also blamed Russia trying to sabotage the talks, which of course makes no sense at all. In my view, there is no possibility that this was the Russians, zero. But who was it? That's some of the questions that has to be answered. It could have been somebody in Ukraine. Ukraine obviously has a lot of anger at these countries for not stopping the oil. We've shown you President Zelensky's been saying for a long time, stop buying the oil, stop buying the oil. Until Europe stops buying the oil, then we can't put the pain on Russia. So he says. Also, the European Union has been putting lots of pressure on, especially Hungary, because Viktor Orbán is at the forefront of that. So when it's an actual significant refinery in Hungary that gets hit, then it certainly is not, especially on the same night as it gets hit in Romania, there is no possibility of simple accident. This was definitely some sabotage, and the question is from who. And as a reminder, let me just show you something that Viktor Orbán said about 3 weeks ago that made a lot of good comments from his own countrymen, but angered a lot of people in the European Union. But he made very clear where he stands on war.
Just like the old empires that oppressed us, now the European Union is also a warlike project. In Brussels, they openly state that the task of the next decade is to defeat Russia on the Eastern Front. In Brussels, they openly say that after the second decade, they will match the Russians on the defense front. That is, every European individual, every European economic entity, and every European nation-state should serve this goal if they belong to the Union. We Hungarians do not want this, yet they want to force us into it, and my dear friends, this is called oppression.
And that is something that he is not going to do. And then you get into the issue where he puts his money where his mouth is, and he does not do those kinds of things. When he's asked to do something that is antagonistic to his own national interest, Viktor Orbán doesn't go down that path, and he's been very articulate. He's been very rational, very logical in laying out the reasons why. And see, it's one thing for France or Great Britain, 1,000 miles away, to be able to say, yeah, you go get them, Hungary. Let's have some issues to cause problems and struggle with Russia, because it's not going to be those countries that get hit. See, at least not first. It's going to be Hungary, who's right on the border, and they understand that. So it is in their national interest not to go to war with the nuclear power Russia that is substantially larger than them. All they have to do is look and see at the example of Ukraine. Why would any rational person want to court war with a much bigger nation that doesn't need to fight you and wouldn't otherwise unless you posed a threat to them? They're not going to. And you're also, as the European Union and as Ukraine, is asking Hungary to harm its own economic interests by stopping buying significantly less expensive oil and gas in plentiful supplies that it needs to conduct its economic activity. And they're asking them to stop it. They're asking them to be antagonistic and potentially go along with the other war crowd that could then find them on the actual battle lines and battles in their country. Now then, they see not from Russia, but from other sources that are supposed to be on their side. And so now that it's starting to look like, remember, he said that 3 weeks ago. It's like oppression for them to try and coerce us into doing what they want. Well, now it's gone beyond words. Now, some entity or entities have actually expanded on that to say, we're going to physically coerce you. Now, listen, if anybody's been paying any attention at all, the idea that Viktor Orbán is, and probably Robert Fico in Slovakia, who was certainly watching this with great attention, is going to suddenly, go weak-kneed and give in to the European Union. They've lost their minds. I mean, they haven't been paying any attention at all. This will only deepen his antagonistic and make even less likely that he does the things that they're asking for. And then you can probably expect some antagonism in some other fronts as well that wasn't there before. So it's not going to end well, and it's not going to help the pro-war parties in either Ukraine, who's been trying to draw the West into the war from the beginning, or from the European Union and the NATO members, et cetera. This is just shows more and more how absurd what we're doing is. Just imagine this, folks. You have somebody or somebodies on the Western side that is so angry at another Western power because they don't want to join them in provoking potentially a war with a nuclear-powered enemy, that they're now attacking them. That is economic espionage. That is in some sense, depending on the context, it could be an act of war. And we've done that to our own side in an attempt to try and coerce and compel another country to act against its national interests. Now, they're not going to do that. So that's going to fail. But that's just also deepening the split, because I promise you, there are other countries in Europe that are well aware of what happened here. And are seeing this for themselves and seeing that the European Union does not have their back. The European Union and NATO and Europe, the integrity is falling apart. It's a myth that they're all trying to work together, that there's value in being a part of it because it helps everyone and it lifts everyone up. No, it's cutting people that don't do what they're told now, not just economic pain, not just political and policy pains, but now physical attacks in their country. They're shredding any kind of unity that existed and probably laying the foundation for their own demise. That's how short-sighted what they have done is. We'll see how this is going to play out over time. But it's also not the only thing. I mentioned to you at the outset that there was also attacks overnight in the air at refineries and energy facilities between Russia and Ukraine one more time. And all of this is happening in the context of President Trump trying to end the war. So he's been saying, hey, listen, I want my Secretary of State Rubio to meet with Lavrov, and then I want to meet with Putin, and I want to bring this war to an end. Now, who do you suppose has incentive not to let that happen? There are some of the same people that may have been behind this issue, this attack on Hungary and Romania itself, because they don't want Trump to end the war. They don't want Trump to stop doing anything. They want Trump to join them against Russia. That's what they actually want. Let's see if they can get that. Now, this is not just world against Trump. Trump is, in some respects, his own worst enemy. So it's a really, really volatile mix of things. And I want to show you exactly what we're talking about here. So yesterday, after all of this fanfare about we're going to get together and we're going to meet, you had President Trump in the Oval Office now say, I'm not going to waste my time if we're not going to get to a meet, because the Russians were kind of chilly to the idea. And I'll show you why that was in a minute. But here's Trump yesterday.
Mr. President, the meeting with Vladimir Putin is canceled or put on hold. Do you know what happened there? And does that affect your decision whether or not to send tomahawks?
No, I don't want to have a wasted meeting. I don't want to have a waste of time, so I'll see what happens. But we did all of these great deals, great peace deals. They're all peace deals. They're agreements, solid agreements, every one of them. But this one, and I said, go to the line of battle, the battlefield lines, and you pull back and you go home, and everybody takes some time off because you got two countries that are killing each other. Two countries are losing 5,000 to 7,000 soldiers a week. So we'll see what happens. We haven't made a determination.
Yeah, we haven't made any determinations. We'll see what happens. Well, let me explain to you part of the reason why there's been a problem. You may recall a few days before that when President Trump announced ahead of time the outcome of the meeting that he wanted to have. And here's where he said, I wanted to go. And you'll see why there might have been a kind of a cool reception. Here's what President Trump said about his objectives.
In my opinion, they should stop the war immediately. You go by the battle line, wherever it is. Otherwise, it's too complicated. You'll never be able to figure it out. Stop right now at the battle line. I told that to President Zelensky. I told it to President Putin.
What do you think should happen with the Donbass region then?
Let it be cut the way it is. It's cut up right now. I think 78% of the land is already taken by Russia. You leave it the way it is right now. They can negotiate something later on down the line.
Yeah, that statement there is virtually assured of making both Zelensky and Putin unhappy and aggravated, and certainly not happy about trying to come together and make some kind of a deal, because those are not terms that either one of them are willing to consider. I mean, let's first of all take a look at Zelensky. Zelensky does not want to give up the Donbass area. He does not want to give up anything. He still wants to cling to this fiction that they can somehow win some sort of a victory. And remember, it was just a month or so ago that President Trump said, I have just discovered it turns out that the Ukraine can go back to their 1991 borders and take all that land back, and who knows, maybe a little bit more. Just kind of throwing, more oil into the bucket and just stirring things up, etc. Didn't make anyone very happy. And of course, no one believed it. Everyone understood, and I mean everyone on all sides of this understood that was a bizarre thing, because there's no possibility for that. The Ukraine side is not even going to avoid being beaten and is still being driven back, however methodically and slowly, backwards. So the idea that somehow you can go forward without the manpower, the industrial capacity, and thousands upon thousands of armored vehicles and millions of rounds of various kinds of ammunition that don't exist. No one's even talking about bringing them on there. So the whole thing was just a curious offer that no one took it seriously whatsoever. And yet Trump keeps going down the road, hoping that that's going to shake things up, that those words are going to make a difference, especially on the Russian side. Like almost as though he thought maybe they'll believe that's true. And now then they'll listen to me and come up with a deal. Well, we know how that turned out. Didn't work that way at all, nor was it ever going to. But going back to Zelensky, he wants something that's more realistic. He doesn't just want to talk about stuff. He wants stuff. And he wanted the Tomahawk cruise missile. He certainly wants a whole lot more equipment and ammunition from the West writ large, a lot of Europe. He would love to get more air defense interceptor missiles. I mean, he wants all of this a big group of things so that he doesn't have to give up anything else. And he most assuredly does not want to give up NATO potential membership, doesn't want to have any kind of demilitarization, obviously doesn't want denazification, because that would mean he would be out of office, he and most of his power structures. So he wants none of those things on the table. So he's not going to agree to just stop fighting where we're at there. That's not in his interest. That's not what he wants to do, because then that would solidify all the loss. Even from Zelensky's position, that's actually a bad deal, because that would cement in his losses that he knows he would never get back. And I don't think that any of his people would be happy with that. I don't think there's many people in his power inner circle that would be happy if he even stopped fighting, whether he had a chance to win or not. There's many reports that that's part of the drive behind him, is that if he agrees to any kind of a ceasefire deal or any kind of a stoppage of the war, that it could be a literal death sentence for him, because there would be people so angry at him inside for willing to do that. I don't have any personal information on that. All I can tell you is what's being reported. And I can tell you that when we see his actions, it's a plausible outcome and a plausible power pressure. But that's not the only one. The other side is on the Russian side. And I don't have to convey to you what the Russians think, because Sergei Lavrov did that for us.
Стало звучать из Вашингтона, что надо немедленно остановиться, не надо ничего больше обсуждать, остановиться, а там пускай история рассудит. Ну, понимаете, если просто остановиться, это означает забыть про первопричины этого конфликта, который американская администрация с приходом к власти Дональда Трампа четко понимала и озвучивала это понимание. Я имею в виду обеспечение внеблокового, нейтрального, безъядерного статуса Украины, что предполагает отказ от каких-либо попыток втягивать ее в НАТО, и я имею в виду прекращение фактического геноцида русского и русскоязычного населения.
You know, I could have chosen a Sergei Lavrov shot from 2022. I could have had another one from 2023, 2024, or even earlier this year. There's so many of them. Or President Putin himself from June 2024. There's so many that could have sent because they all run together because they're always the same. Denazification, demilitarization, the territory that Russia has already annexed, and of course, no NATO. All those things are the case. And as especially in the last year or so, it always comes back to, and President Putin, I think the first time he mentioned this was during that interview with Tucker Carlson when he went to Moscow less than a year or so into the war, when he said root causes. We have to get to the root causes. This is not going to be over unless we address what led to the war in the first place from the Russian side, the side that has the power, the side that has the nuclear weapons arsenal. So Russia is very clearly telling you until we get those issues settled, the war's not going to end. I'm not even going to contemplate just putting my guns down and everybody going back to mama. I mean, I don't understand why anybody thinks that was ever going to have any positive outcome. But that's what people have. Now, with what's happened so far in the last 24 hours or so, the last 12 hours, is that Zelensky is probably encouraged because he saw Trump yesterday saying, oh, well, I'm not going to go on some meeting if it's going to waste my time. One wonders what he thought it would have been when he first made the offer. No, nothing on the Russian side has changed in that, but I guess he heard some of the reaction from the Russian side and now doesn't want to make another Alaska meeting where you make this big pomp and circumstances and then literally come away with nothing, that nothing has changed before, during, or after, which should have occurred to him regardless of what he heard anything from Russia, because it never changes. But yet that's what it was. That's going to, though, make Zelensky happy. And so Zelensky wants to continue fighting. And so what he has to do, first of all, is lay the foundation for fiction that, hey, don't worry about the front line and stuff moving to the west and our slow, methodical defeat. We got that solved.
The situation at the front, in particular in the Pokrovskar sector and neighboring areas, as well as Kupiansk, the border areas of the Kharkiv and Sumy regions and the Zaporizhzhia region. We are maintaining control of the situation. And I am grateful to every one of our units for their resilience. We are preparing certain steps of ours at the front and responding to every Russian strike. We also spoke with Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Sysky, including about our long-range capabilities. There has been an increase both in the range and in the accuracy of our long-range sanctions against Russia. Practically every day or two, Russian oil refineries are being hit, and this contributes to bringing Russia back to reality.
Okay, coming back to reality would be a great thing if he would do it. Now, there is some truth in what he said. They have been developing more and effective long-range strike assets, whether that's missiles or drones, etc. And we saw overnight there was another big success. They hit in Bryansk, and I can't recall the second city that they hit. But there were two cities in Russia which they again hit and knocked a lot of power offline. And then Bryansk has been hit. Bryansk is a city that's pretty close to the Ukraine border, which is why they're choosing that one. But the issue is it's a known target, and the missiles are getting through. The drones are getting through. So that shows that Russia's air defense is not impervious, as none is, but it still gets most of the things down. Yet some things are going to continue to get through. And of course, in retaliation for that, after that strike came, Russia launched another salvo of 430 combination of missiles and drones. And of course, those also saturated across much of central and eastern Ukraine, striking targets and again hitting oil infrastructures. electric generation power stations, transportation with trains, etc. All these things that are necessary to move military forces around, things that are necessary to run factories. And we don't know all the targets. I don't know if there were any command and control, oil storage units, ammunition storage units. I don't know any of those things yet. We can imagine that some of those are hit. They usually are, but they have been focusing on the energy of late. And so whatever damage the Ukraine side did to the Russian side in hitting Bryansk is not exactly a big military target. It's not something that's going to cause a lot of problems for the Russian war machine because of the threat of long-range strikes, they have moved them much further back. There have also been reports overnight, I haven't got them confirmed yet, but apparently Storm Shadow missiles were used as part of the Ukrainian strike into Russia. And if it turns out that Storm Shadow missiles specifically were used and were aided either by the United States or Britain, and those struck some targets in there, we have the potential for response also from Russia, an asymmetric response. It's not likely that Russia is going to launch some missile anywhere outside of Ukraine against any British or American assets, but you have to have British, and I think both British and American assets, to be able to have those missiles land on target, intelligence, targeting data, etc., and maybe even the physical operation. But the fact that they were British Storm Shadow missiles, if that proves to be true, that shows that we could again have another potential for escalation. So this could be a problematic day in the nature and in the interest of peace for those who want to see this war come to an end. And listen, Ukraine has more problems than stirring up trouble, whether them or their European backers in their own European backyard with Hungary and Romania, or expanding and now using British Storm Shadow missiles to affect inside of Russia. There's also a math problem. And our very own friend Larry Johnson, who was on the Sanchez effect, talked about some of this missile math.
Consider this. Let's say you've got an inbound Iskander missile from Russia. Ukraine's going to have to fire 4 Patriot missiles to try to take down that Iskander, and they won't be able to because the Iskander can evade them. Each one of those missiles costs $7 million. Gosh. Now, I guarantee you the Iskander doesn't cost $28 million.
Right.
So here's Zelensky shooting off 4 to try to take it down. Well, we've seen, look, we've had several days in a row where Russia's shooting between missiles and drones 600 a day, 800 a day, 700 a day. Let's just assume you fire 2 Patriot missiles for each one of those. In one day with 800, you've shot 1,600 Patriot missiles. That's 5 years of production.
And of course, that's one of the reasons they won't fire that many, no matter how many incoming Iskanders or drones they have, because they don't have them. They don't have 1,600 Patriots to use. They're scrapping to try to get any. And as a result of a lot of that, and some of the reporting I've seen shows that Ukraine has concluded that best to try and shoot down some of these drones and the decoys that come along with them. It's impossible to tell from the cross-section of radar which is which in the air, so they have to assume everything is armed, knock it down. A lot of them, they're using actually traditional AAA guns, that anti-aircraft guns that can fire, I think, like 57, 53 millimeter shells. Other machine guns just parked on the back of trucks that are in known egress routes, etc. They're doing literally everything. They're also using drones to try and knock some of these air drones to knock another drone out. So the Ukraine is getting pretty clever on some of that. So they don't have to go all of this. And in fact, you really wouldn't even want to use a Patriot interceptor on a Garin drone unless you're really in a lot of trouble. But those hypersonics that Larry was talking about, especially, he's probably right on that. That math just doesn't work, because even if you fired 4, you're probably not going to hit it. And you can't keep doing that because you just don't have them. We don't have that many to give. So you have a real problem here that you're never going to get ahead of this. And we saw on the latest one overnight, there were 430 aerial vehicles of various types that were launched. They got some of them down. Most of them got through. A good percentage of them got through. And then we've seen, again, they continue to suffer damage after damage. they can never keep up. The Ukraine side can never keep up with what the Russians said, because the Russians can just launch hundreds of these things in nights. Ukraine can launch a handful periodically. And yeah, some of them got through, but the net effect on the Russian war machine is negligible, if not none at all. Like I said, Bryansk is not a major military strike. So yeah, you hit it. And it certainly messed up a lot of the people who were living there, and it interdicted their lives, but it didn't have anything to do with the war effort, because Russia is aware of the range of a lot of these stuff, and a lot of their most important facilities, oil infrastructure, and especially military factories to make weapons, ammunition, and missiles and all that, are much deeper into the country, just like they did in World War II, beyond the reach of anything that we have so far. Even should they have gotten the long-range missiles that Ukraine was trying to get with Tomahawks, even those, some of the factories would be extended beyond this, because Russia has foreseen this, and they have put things quite far away from for that very reason. So even that would make any fundamental difference if some of them got through. But of course, then we have the additional problem of escalation. And now, again, it remains to be seen overnight. If this report about the storm shadow turns out to be true, we could see an escalation, probably in an asymmetrical thing there. Everything goes against us trying to get this war to an end because of our actions. Russia has been very clear. A lot of these statements, especially coming out of the European Union in the last few days, they keep saying, well, we need all this pressure, economic pressure, military pressure, to bring Russia back to the table. Russia's at the table. They've never left the table. The problem is, and let's get definitions right, you don't want to bring Russia back to the table. You just want Russia at the table to sing your song, have a view you want. That's what this is all about. That's what you're attempting to do very poorly to do, because you can't. You don't have the leverage. You don't have the resources. You don't have the capacity. Russia does. And how much longer they're going to stay, holding their nose and being restrained in how they respond, we don't know. I get the feeling that there are some in the West that want Russia to lose their restraint and then to strike deeper inside and in Europe outside of Ukraine borders. I think that some want a war. I think they have some fantastical, twisted idea that they can maybe keep it from, that they can keep it from going to nuclear. And they think, this would help. We could just get a contained war, just get a little bit, then we'll see. Now everybody will finally get on board, and then we'll push Russia back. And then that's just detached from reality thinking. It is bizarre. It is incredibly dangerous, should anybody be feeling that way. And unfortunately, because of the actions, we have to conclude that there may well be people in positions of authority in the West that are thinking exactly that way, and putting all of our lives at risk in the process. All the regular people who are not crazy and who are not looking at things in a twisted and perverted way. Things that reality, truth on the ground. That's what we're looking at here. And then one final thing I want to show you, that I talked about missile math. It's not working for the Ukraine. Well, neither is manpower math.
The morale problem on the Ukraine side is desperate, as are the casualties. We've seen, since start of January in 2025, when the government of Russia, government of Ukraine agreed to exchange the bodies of dead soldiers.
Yeah,
it's worked out to an average that for every dead Russian soldier returned to the control of the Russian government, Russia is turning back 35 to 45 dead Ukrainians.
Wow.
Now,
40 to 1 odds.
Yes. Now, here's where we get into this interesting analytical contradiction. On the one hand, Western analysts, General Ben Hodges, General David Petraeus, General Jack Keane, Admiral Stavridis, they're all saying, oh, Russia's doing really bad. They're barely making any progress. It's really slow on the front. And then when you point out those odds of bodies, they say, well, the reason that's happening is the Russians are moving so fast that the Ukrainians don't have time to recover the bodies. And you go, okay, which is it? Is it slow
or is it fast?
Pick one. Pick one or the other, but you can't have both.
Yeah, but they do try to have both. They try to have both virtually every day. And again, we aren't dealing with reality. We aren't dealing with the truth on the ground. We're dealing with preferences and what we would like to be true, no matter how many Ukrainian bodies keep piling up, because we seem unconcerned about that. And now it seems that we're unconcerned about oil refineries in our own allied countries being blown up. I mean, so far this morning, this has just happened overnight, so we'll see what kind of reactions come later. But at least initially, I haven't seen any kind of emergency meetings that would need to be convened, that the United States is very alarmed about this development. Nothing at all. I mean, there should be a lot of diplomatic activity going on that focused on the West, of saying, we ain't doing this. I don't know who did this, but you damn sure better stop, like right now. We are not going to be eating our own here, because that, even if you don't do it because it's morally right, you can do it because that will shatter any kind of unity you have and drive people further and further apart and more fragmentation. And that would only help your adversary, because I assure you, they are very, very cohesive formed. Now, obviously, it's just one country. They don't have to worry about any kind of allies here. That's what we should be doing, but it's not what we're doing, at least not what I've seen so far. I even wonder if Trump's going to pay any attention. But then the question is going to be, where is this going to go then? Because if now then this meeting is off the table, because at least the Sergei Lavrov, Marco Rubio meeting was supposed to happen, at least was penciled in on the 30th of October. Now, it doesn't look like even that's going to happen. And of course, if that doesn't happen, then there's definitely not going to be a meeting in Budapest between Putin and Trump. And there shouldn't be one unless there's something to agree on. And I saw earlier this morning a statement from Kremlin spokesman who said, there's no point in having these meetings unless we first have done the hard diplomatic work behind the scenes about agreeing what's going to be agreed to. That used to just be like diplomacy 101. I mean, everyone understood that. That's just the entry point. Of course, you're going to have low-level delegations that work together behind the scenes, out of the spotlight, no cameras, no microphones, and to say, all right, where are we going to go here? What can we work on? And then if they can come to some that's just even close, then they can bring the principals in and they can maybe close the deal. Then we got a shot at something. But when you don't even have these conversations here, and of course, President Trump is infamously not worried about details. Well, look, that can work, man. That can work if you're talking about the United States and I want a ballroom. I'm going to get a ballroom and I'm going to bring a tractor in and just start tearing the building apart. Hypothetically, of course. You can do that because you own the territory. You can just give an order and they're going to get it done. You can just give an order to your ICE and tell them they're going to go into one city or another. You can give an order to your National Guard. You can just order them to go there and they're going to go, because that's how the system is set up. However much people might not like it, that is the system. And for the most part, he's operating within his constitutional restraints. Other places he's not. But even that, though, is in the country here. And as long as people obey that, then it can work out. None of that applies outside of our border. Once you get overseas and you're talking about another sovereign country, Russia, they will not do what they are told. And they are not going to take action antithetical to their national interests. They're simply not going to do it, however much you may wish it, however much you may try to put pressure on there. That's from Trump. Or if you're the European Union and you're going to try to compel Russia to do what you're bidding from a position of weakness, and then somehow in your mind you think that that's going to work, I mean, that's bizarre. That is a problem. And one of the things I've been studying here of late, and I just keep getting more and more alarmed, I've been studying the real intricate details that led up to World War I. And we should never, I don't know how much you're aware of it, but we should never have been in World War I. That assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand should never have resulted in a world war. At the most, it should have been maybe the Fourth Balkan War or something, or a war between Serbia and Austro-Hungary. That's at the worst of it should have been. And even that shouldn't have been. But the fact that it turned into this much, much bigger thing were because people were foolish. They weren't thinking, and they were just reacting to a lot of things. And they were just using a lot of the mental constructs that had already existed, and they just drifted or sleptwalked right into war. And we're doing something, I think, worse this time, because much of the problem that happened in 1914 was because of the poor communications capabilities, and people couldn't react quickly enough. or they didn't have enough advanced information that they needed to make decisions, and then they made them in the absence of which turned out to be contradictory to what they would have done otherwise. And then here we're in war. This time, obviously, every bit of communication exists across the globe, in your hand. Everybody's got it. Nobody's without it at any time. You can get, especially as a head of state or somebody in the high offices of government, can get whatever they need in an instant. It's not knowledge and information that's the problem. It's the capacity to process it that's the problem. And we've got too many people not believing their own eyes about what they see on the ground, not believing what's absolute reality on the ground because they keep thinking too many leaders. All we got to do is just force it on the ground. We can create our own reality because they've had too many experiences where they could do that. When things weren't working the way they wanted, they can just muddle through it or just coerce somebody into doing something where eventually it would work out, or even when it didn't, what's the big deal? Take Afghanistan, for example. That was a complete disaster strategically, but I mean, other than embarrassment and some bad TV and some bad political fodder back and forth between the two sides here since 2021, the world didn't fall apart. Our national security wasn't impacted. Hardly anybody in America even knew about it. That's the danger of having a disaster like this, where you try to, for 20 years, both parties in the United States continued to pretend everything was going good. Every time they were in charge, things are working now. So those other guys, until the other guys got in, and then they said the same things, and it was never true. And you get this mentality in that you can just massage this with words until you get what you want. And then if it doesn't work out, wash your hands and move on. That's just how it works. And with something like the Taliban, who can't do anything about it anyway, you can muddle through that and not have any real consequence. But you have now formed this mental construct in this pattern that can't distinguish between the ones that don't work or can't work and the ones that could end in catastrophe. And that is one of the things I worry about, is the entire Western leadership elite right now, primarily, with a few exceptions. Thankfully, there are some, but for the majority of them, they're not able to disentangle themselves from these bad processes that they've developed over years. And now you come up with this immovable object in the Russians that aren't going to be the Taliban. They're not going to be Vietnam, folks. They're not going to be the insurgency in Iraq. These guys have the substantial capacity to fight back. And if you keep pushing a bad situation, you may find out firsthand in your face. And that will be bad for Russia. That would be bad for Ukraine. It would be bad for Europe. It would be bad for mankind. Everybody would lose in that. And I'm not even talking about if it goes nuclear. That's self-evident. I'm just talking about if it stayed conventional. If we muddle ourselves and stumble ourselves into a war because of our abject unwillingness to acknowledge reality, everybody is going to lose. And I pray that we never get to that point. And I certainly hope that with shows like this, with some of our other colleagues in this arena that are telling the truth, I hope that enough people finally start paying attention. I'm talking about regular people. We've seen this No King's Day where 7 million people protested in a single day in the United States. That was a blip in the screen, but it also shows that people are starting to wake up. And if they get motivated in the right way, things can change. And that's certainly my hope for that. Appreciate you guys very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.